So here's like two control players. They both basically pro league tier in terms of mechanics, and they're playing LG duels on R5, where if you hit the enemy, you gain health back. So this should be an actual test of your ability to strafe. I'm not gonna go over all like 15 minutes of it because the things that like you can talk about will be pretty obvious, like a couple of kills in. Some fights here, I feel like you over like commit to like an anti-mirror, meaning that like even though you have like less health, you still commit to an anti-mirror with like no bias, so the other guy just wins. Because both of you guys can shoot straight, both of you guys can output like basically the same amount of damage. So like committing to such a mirror, such an anti-mirror, even though you have less health, is gonna get killed. Like he's not even cracked, and you're only like one shot. Right. This was done quite well. You basically aim dipped him really hard, but this is the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to your like the number one thing I saw with you guys is like LG duo is that notice how throughout the entire fight, like throughout the whole fight, okay, suppose it's both of you guys, notice how the distance between the both of you is basically the same. When I was watching this earlier, what I noticed is both of you guys try to keep that you try to keep that distance. Bloomingflower like kind of goes back sometimes, and then you just push forward. Like it's like a common trend. Like you guys always keep that distance between you guys, between each other. But yeah, back to the point. Notice how throughout like basically all of these fights, you guys keep a distance between the both of you. There's a distance, and you guys maintain that distance throughout the entire fight. That's the number one thing. What's something that both of you can't do is just to walk forward. Because walking forward allows you to do this thing that we call circling. You guys do it a few times throughout the fight, like throughout the entire fight, but you can do it a lot more. Circling, did I spell it right? Did I spell circling right? I did, okay. Circling? So why is circling important? Right? Circling is really powerful because we can visualize it. Suppose this is you. Actually, no, suppose this is the enemy. And then suppose this is you. A little bit bigger. Right? Notice what happens when you circle them and the enemy's not aware that this is what you're doing. So, let's get an example of this from myself. See, this is a good example of this. Like, notice what happens when I do this. When I do this, suppose the enemy is not aware that I'm circling them, and they're just trying to shoot at me. So, their strafes, if their goal is to just shoot at me, right? Suppose they're just trying to strafe aim. I'm moving around them so fast that basically no matter like how fast they like strafe or how they strafe, over time they're basically going to be on the same spot on the map. There's no bias to it. And by doing this, I get to to circle around them, and also get them to basically get stuck on the same part of the map. And that gives me a huge advantage, because that means it's much easier for me to hit them anywhere like I am, because I'm just aiming inwards. I'm just aiming into the circle. I'm just aiming into the circle against an enemy that I know has no bias. So that gives me a huge advantage, right? And that also lets me gain an angle on him. Gain a huge angle on him if he's not aware that that's what I'm doing, right? Let's show this a little bit better. It gives me a huge angle around him. Huge angle. And gaining an angle is the key to getting the other player to miss, basically. Suppose two players. Suppose this is you. Suppose this is the enemy. I've said this before, and this is pretty basic of a concept, is that... Let's increase the scale a little bit. It's just 100 and 200, okay. Yep. Beast. Anyway. There's always an angle between the both of you, if you're looking at each other. Based on where you are and where you're looking. So... Let's say this is the enemy. And let's say this is you. If you're looking at each other, right, there's no angle, because it's just a straight line, right? No angle. So you don't need to aim, you don't need to move, you just literally look forward and shoot. And you hit the enemy. But suppose you gain an angle. This is based on where the enemy is looking at. Keep this in mind. This is based on where the enemy is looking at. Right? Suppose the enemy is just looking forward. And suppose that you are looking at him. You have created an angle right here. Right? And this is good because the enemy, right now, in this moment, he's missing. He has to move his crosshair in order to hit you. He has to change the way that, like, the direction that he's aiming at into, like, onto you, so that he can hit you. This is the entire point of why a bias is good. Why a bias is worth going for. Like, in general, because a bias will always increase the angle between the both players. And that angle is determined not just by how you strafe, but also where the enemy is looking at, right? Suppose both of you hit like a bias to the same angle, like towards the same side, and you both like stutter and whatever. You don't really gain an angle, even if it's a good strafe, because over time, like, you're still looking at each other. You're still looking at each other directly, right? Even in a vacuum, what you did was a good strafe. Right. So this is angles. I've talked about this before. And back into our circling example. Why circling is really good is because, again, you get a huge angle over the enemy. Because the enemy is essentially stun locked in this spot if he's not aware that he's getting circled. Right? And getting an angle, again, is the key to, and the reason why stuff like bias is good. It's a lot harder to get an angle on controller because obviously the game aims for you guys. But it's still possible. Like, you know that it's possible just from your time playing on controller. You know that it's still, even though it is definitely harder compared to M&K, it is still completely possible to get an angle, and that should still be your goal in trying to dodge, for example, if a dodge is what you're going for. This is again like kind of similar, right? Where both of you guys are just keeping a distance between each other, and just going left and right in terms of your strafe. This was also really done. Like again, this was done really well by Blooming at the end there. Like he got a huge angle on you. Now I'm going to talk about the second thing that I saw from this VOD, and that's going to require some input from you guys. And is that when you're doing these strafes, right? When you're taking these fights, when you're mirroring or anti-mirroring, when you're doing all these things, my question for you is that when are you aware? Like, is this your goal to mirror them, or is this just something that you do reactively? Are you just reacting to what the other guy is doing and then so you mirror them? It's like, this is a really important question. Because if you're just reacting to what the other guy is doing, that means the other guy has a huge advantage, because that means the other guy can control what you do. Right? Are you mirroring him because that's just the easy way for you to hit him? Really bad voice crack there, my bad. Are you mirroring them because you're confident in taking that aim duel? Or is this something else? Like, this is a really important question. If you're thinking about it, then it's good. Then I don't have that much to say. Yeah, I can see that. I can see that from you, definitely. I feel like that's a lot of times why you manage to win overall against Sherb over here, because I see that, because I think you're trying to get angles more than he is. And the reason why I ask you guys whether or not you guys are thinking about what, like, the streets that you're hitting, like, actively, is because this, another thing that could be really apparent when it comes to playing alpha like this, in, like, LG duels like this, is something that we call conditioning. So conditioning is, that's not really, like, the definition for it is really simple. It's literally just that. It's conditioning the enemy into it's just that. Conditioning the enemy into playing in a way that you can predict. And obviously you can condition the other player, and you can also be conditioned by the other player. Right? So to avoid this happening to you, of course that's why you need to be actively thinking about what you're doing. That's why it's important. So what is conditioning? Again, is playing in such a way that makes the enemy play predictably, in a way that you can manipulate and gain an advantage. So a number one, like the biggest example of this is, I see this a lot in MK players, is that someone gets pushed, like, this is a really common thing that I see with a lot of MK players, is this is what happens to them. Someone pushes you, like, close, they apply that pressure, and then they just default to, like, an anti-mirror. No matter how much health they have, no matter, like, whether or not they have, like, the right gun, it's just, they just default to that. And this happens because the guy getting pushed is not thinking about their movement. He's not thinking about what he needs to do. He's just reacting to getting pushed, and then they just default to anti-mirror because that's the comfortable way to aim, right? It's just that. And this is just one example of mirroring, right? This is just one example where the way that you strafe is conditioned. There's other examples of this. For example, let's say fighting against you, right? So let's say I'm fighting against you. I like AD spam a little bit, Like I 80 spam a little bit, right? Actually, this is a shit example. Let's get a better one. Suppose I'm playing next to the wall. Suppose I'm playing next to the wall. Suppose I'm playing next to the wall. You might expect me to strafe away from the wall, right? Because my options next to the wall is very limited. Like, I can't go left. If I go left, I run into the wall, right? It's not possible. So you might expect me to walk out away from the wall and go right, right? So you might, especially for M and K, so you might put your crosshair like right here. You might put your crosshair right here and wait for me to walk into it, right? But hypothetically, I could be banking on you to predict me going right, and I just keep playing next to the wall. Like, this is an example of that. Like, you can, like, this is a situation where I managed to condition you into aiming away from me. This is more relevant to M&K only because it's kind of hard for you to make this type of mistake on controller. That's why I don't talk about it that much, because controller. But again, this is another form of conditioning. Don't crouch. I don't know why you crouch. Not you, but like Blooming. I don't know if it's a bad habit or is that something you're trying to do. Strictly speaking, is just bad in general, because like by crouching, you really obvious, like you move slower, obviously. You crouch into headshots. Because no one's aiming for headshots in this game. Like, you know, it's fucking Apex, it's not Overwatch. So everyone's aiming at chest level, especially for controller. And if you crouch, you're just crouching into getting headshotted. And in like a maybe M&K kind of game, like M&K only game, like you can argue that moving slower means that you can like change the way, like change the speed in which you strafe, but again, doesn't happen on Apex. So crouching is almost just strictly bad. Like, the only argument that you can have is maybe, except for Wingman. But even then, it's still arguable, because for Wingman, some people actually do aim for headshots, like me. Like, I actually aim at head level. So when you crouch, right? When I'm aiming at head level, crouching is then valid because I'm moving my head like hitbox, right? So that makes sense. But even then, if the enemy is just aiming at chest level and I crouch, I just crouch into the headshots. So overall, like, crouching is just mostly not worth it. Unless you know for a fact the other guy is going for headshots. Like, I can see, yeah, like that, like there would be what I meant by circling. You still lost, but notice how much you moved throughout the map and how much he moved out throughout the map when you were circling him here. I talk about circling a lot, but obviously it's not perfect, and there are counters to it. Like with any amount of like strafe, there's always a counter to it, and the way to counter it is really easy. Is either you back up, so either you back up away so that he can't circle you, or you make the really alpha play of walking into the circle to just block his path. And doing this requires a understanding for you to know when you're getting circled. It feels like sometimes you start tunneling into what the enemy is doing, and you just focus on outputting damage, and you ignore like what happens to your own strafe, to your own bias, and the enemy can just hit more shots than you. Doesn't seem that you're aware that like, and I think that's why like Blooming won more overall against you, is because sometimes you get locked into like just outputting the most amount of damage that you can, and you ignore like what your own strafe looks like, and you ignore like what you're doing with your own strafe. Like very low bias, just mirroring him, regardless of whether or not he has more health than you. So probably like the main thing, the main difference between the both of you. And again, I think what made Blooming like win more against you is that notice how he's actively looking for an angle. Notice how he's like the amount of space that he covers throughout the fight is a lot more than yours. Like he's constantly trying to look for that angle. He does it more. He doesn't do it always. He can do it more, I think. But I think overall he does it a lot more than you do. And that's the difference between both of you. And that's why he manages to get the edge on you. Can't really circle a person aggressively that's slowing you with shots. I would say, yeah, definitely. Especially in Apex, where bullet slow is bad. But I think overall, like, something that they can do, especially throughout this entire VOD, is just to walk forward. I don't think they're walking forward enough. They're just committing to these like really tough like aim drills where if you're at a disadvantage, like right here, there's nothing you can do because you just die. But yeah, let's wrap it up. So number one, walk forward. Like consider walking forward. You have more options than just left and right. Number two, when you're trying to dodge, right? When you're trying to dodge, your goal is to gain an angle, because that's the point, right? In the scope of Apex, that is. Like I wouldn't say this is the go in let's say Quake, but in Apex, I think this is the go. The goal in dodging in Apex is to gain an angle over the opponent, such that you, for example, you walk out of the aim assist, or you walk out from, like, or you walk away from the line of fire, for example. And number three, minor thing, but stop crouching. It's bad. In regular fights, LG duels, whatever, it's bad. But yeah, crouching is bad because you're lowering your straight speed for no gain, basically, and you're basically crouching to people's headshots. So these are the three things I would say that I can see from your VOD. Right. That's it. Number two especially important. This applies to MNK or controller. Especially for controllers, I think, because this is, I think, where the gap is for controllers. A lot of people can shoot really straight on controller, but not a lot of people have the understanding to actively look for an angle in the fight. I think that's like basically the sole reason why Blooming won more against you overall, is that he's more actively searching for that angle. Like aim for aim, both of you guys are really close. Just aim for aim. And again, number four. I put this at number four. Number three, more mindfulness on advantage. Because again, a lot of these fights, you have like a distinct disadvantage in terms of health, and you're still committing to a mirror or anti-mirror, and that gets you killed because, again, both of you can shoot really straight. Right? If you have less health and you go for that mirror, 99% of the time you will die first, right? Because the other guy is not gonna miss.